So there I was, groggy and half lost between dreams and reality, when I noticed it, a tiny slip of paper barely poking out from under my apartment door. Now, waking up to a mysterious note isn't exactly how I planned to start my Tuesday, but hey, life loves its little surprises. Curious and a bit suspicious, to be honest, I yanked the note free. It was neat, handwritten in perfectly legible cursive kind of fancy actually, and it said something that made me freeze mid-yawn, took the dog out at 7003A. M again. You always hesitate at the corner before crossing. Thought that was cute. Wait, what? How does someone know that? I don't even tell anyone about that nervous little pause I have before stepping onto the street. I'm usually a pretty private dude, especially about these weird, dumb habits. I blinked, half expecting some prank to jump out from behind the doorframe. No one. Just the silence and that note sitting on my floor like an unwelcome morning guest. I mean, yes, I walk the dog every morning, but for someone to notice not just the walk, but the hesitation, the tiny detail most would overlook, that was a bit unsettling, right? Was this some stalker situation? Or was it just that my life had somehow become the mundane episode of a reality show I didn't agree to be cast on? I sat on the edge of my bed, dog leash still tangled in my hand, heart speed walking through a whole lineup of thoughts. How deeply does this person know me? And, more importantly, what did they want with that oddly specific nugget of info? I couldn't shake the feeling this wasn't just about a morning walk. Something about the note made the air in the room feel thicker, like the usual comfortable clutter of my apartment had turned into a stage set for something else. One thing was clear though, whoever left it knew me a little too well. And now, I was stuck wondering, how does someone know about the one weird thing I do every morning? Jamie, my roommate, was the kind of person who could walk into a room and make it feel like a circus had just rolled through, but with an odd twist of mystery that never quite settled. He wasn't just eccentric, he had this knack for showing up at exactly the wrong or maybe right moments, always with an unreadable smirk and eyes that seemed like they were storing secrets you didn't have clearance for. Sometimes I wondered if he was just oblivious to his own weirdness, or if he was deliberately keeping me guessing on purpose. We'd been sharing this cramped city apartment for almost a year, the kind of place where the walls were thin enough to catch snippets of every conversation from the neighbors or every argument if the landlord was conducting another one of his surprise visits. Hanson, our landlord, had this unfailing habit of popping in without warning, usually right when I was either at my messiest or just trying to enjoy a quiet evening with takeout and a bad action movie. The neighborhood itself was lively, to put it mildly. There was Mrs. Alvarez next door, who had a habit of standing at her window with binoculars like she was auditioning for a spy movie. Then there was the mysterious guy across the hall who came and went at odd hours and never really said much beyond a nod. Honestly, with all these characters around, privacy was already stretched thin. Believe me, you get used to peeking out your window to see if the coast is clear before doing anything remotely embarrassing. Now, thinking back, there were these little incidents that seemed harmless at the time but felt a little different under a new lens. Like how Jamie once accidentally showed up by my side 10 minutes after I'd just moved to the kitchen twice. Or how sometimes I'd find my stuff slightly moved or that weird smudge on my desk that looked suspiciously like a fingerprint. At first, I'd just shrugged it off, blaming the shared space and our chaotic schedules. But now, those tiny clues started rattling around in my mind, making me feel like I was part of some twisted scavenger hunt without the prize at the end. That note, though, it wasn't just some harmless prank that you could laugh off with a beer. This was different. It was a boundary crossed. Privacy in this building wasn't a given. It was a fragile, negotiating kind of thing, like trying to balance a stack of delicate china teacups on a skateboard. And that note? It felt like someone revved up the board and sent it hurtling downhill. I wasn't just uncomfortable, I was legitimately unsettled. I tried to think hard about who would even know about that hesitation before crossing the street. It wasn't the dog, obviously, unless he'd secretly developed the power to write notes. Jamie? Maybe. He had that weirdly precise memory for the mundane and he was always nearby. Or was it one of the neighbors? The guy across the hall seemed like the type to keep to himself, but appearances can be deceiving, right? At one point, Jamie shuffled into the living room humming some tune that sounded suspiciously like it was from a spy movie soundtrack. I gave him a look. "You see something weird around here?" I asked, slipping the note from my hand back into my pocket without showing him. "Oh, you mean that adorable fan mail?" "No, I haven't seen anything suspicious," he said with a smirk that didn't completely reach his eyes. "Yeah, right." It was one of those moments where I figured Jamie knew more than he was letting on, but I wasn't ready to confront him head on just yet. Maybe it was my own paranoia kicking in, but the way he avoided my gaze when I mentioned the note felt like a silent challenge. Meanwhile, our nosy landlord, Mr. Hanson, decided to drop by again the next day just to check on the plumbing. Which, as always, turned into a 2-hour interrogation about rent and complaints he probably forgot to pass on to the building manager months ago. While Mr. Hanson was drilling me with questions, Jamie disappeared, slipped out, or maybe just vanished behind a closet door, which was typical. But the timing made me wonder, was Jamie out of sight on purpose? Or was he just expert in playing hide-and-seek in an apartment the size of a shoebox? Later that evening, I caught a glimpse of the mysterious neighbor in the hallway, stepping out with his usual quiet grace. He glanced my way for a second, almost like he was weighing whether to say something. Instead, he just gave me a nod that felt less casual and more deliberate. "Something up?" I blurted out before I could stop myself. He hesitated, then shrugged. "People notice when you're predictable." Thanks for that cryptic insight. I wasn't sure if it was meant as a warning or a friendly observation, but either way, it didn't make me feel any better. As the days passed, those small, weird incidents I thought were just quirks or coincidences started to pile up in my head. Jamie's constant presence, the landlord's timing, the neighbor's silent nod, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit. And that note? Well, I tucked it away somewhere safe, but it was always there in the back of my mind, reminding me that in this cramped apartment, my little morning secret wasn't so secret after all. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was crawling just under the surface, waiting to be uncovered, something that was about to tip the uneasy balance in ways I hadn't expected. After stewing over the note and the sneaky little signs around the apartment, I decided it was time to get proactive. Not in a call the cops, we've got a stalker kind of way, though, yeah. A hint of that adrenaline was buzzing under my skin, but more like a I'm going to catch whoever's behind this nonsense red-handed vibe. So I set up my little makeshift surveillance plan, which, if you ask Jamie, probably looked more like a misguided episode of a detective sitcom than the work of a serious investigator. First stop was the hallway outside my door. I rigged a cheap webcam I'd bought for online meetings, angling it discreetly, well, as discreetly as you can in a hallway where literally everyone walks by daily. I set it to record on motion, feeling equal parts proud and ridiculous as I taped it to the wall with the kind of resolve only a sleep-deprived, semi-paranoid guy could muster. This was my stakeout, my version of detective work in the big city. Of course, Jamie immediately picked up on what I was doing, though he pretended to be uninterested. "Planning to spy on the neighbors now?" he asked one evening, leaning casually against the doorframe, that same unreadable smirk playing on his lips. "Call it preventative privacy preservation," I replied, trying to sound way cooler than I felt. Jamie just laughed and disappeared down the hall, leaving me to my glory and my growing sense of unease. Days passed with no new notes, no sign of someone sneaking around, or so I thought. Then, one afternoon, I spotted something odd on the footage. There, captured right in the grainy glow of the camera, was the mysterious neighbor from across the hall. He wasn't simply passing by, he lingered near my door, glancing left and right like he was expecting someone or waiting for a signal. I paused the video, zoomed in, and frowned at the screen. Why would he be hanging around outside my door? It wasn't like we chatted much, we barely exchanged more than a nod and a few words in the hallway. The next evening, I decided to confront him. There he was, standing outside his apartment, the dim hallway light casting long shadows on the walls. I gathered whatever courage I had, nervously juggling a cup of lukewarm coffee as I approached. "Hey, noticed you were by my door earlier," I said, trying to sound casual but suspecting I probably looked more like an over-caffeinated interrogator. He looked at me with those calm, unreadable eyes and, after a pause, said, "I might know a thing or two about those notes." And I blinked. "You mean you know who's been leaving them?" Instead of answering directly, he reached into his pocket and handed me a crumpled piece of paper. It was another note, but this one was different, less cryptic and oddly familiar. "Not all secrets are meant to be hidden," it read. "Sometimes they're just waiting for the right person to notice." Before I could process that, Jamie emerged from the shadows, hands shoved deep into his hoodie pockets. His face was serious now, no longer the casual jester I was used to. "Thought you might like an explanation," Jamie said, stepping forward. I finally looked at him. "Wait, what? You're involved in this?" There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt? Amusement? Maybe a bit of both. "Yeah, I'm the one leaving the notes." I felt like someone had punched the wind out of my lungs. Why? What's the point in all this? "It's creepy." Jamie shrugged, then gave me a half smile. "I guess I was trying to make sure you noticed the little things. The parts of life we usually miss while stuck in our routines. Besides, it was a prank at first, a way to break up the monotony. But," I gestured at the note, "you don't just casually notice someone's hesitation before crossing the street." "How did you even see that?" Jamie's grin faded a touch. "I'm often nearby," he admitted. "Maybe too often." I let that hang in the air for a moment. Jamie's presence suddenly made more sense. The strange timing, the mysterious disappearances, the fingerprints and smudges that felt like gentle invasions of my space. "And the neighbor?" I asked, glancing toward him. Jamie exchanged a glance with the quiet man who only shrugged. "Consider me the lookout," the neighbor said dryly. "I prefer a little privacy, but some things slip through the cracks." An awkward silence settled between us, broken only by the dog's soft whine from somewhere inside. "So, this is all just a weird game?" I finally asked, half exasperated, half relieved. "Maybe," Jamie said, "but sometimes the weird games are the only way to get through to someone." I wasn't sure if I was amused, annoyed, or maybe a cocktail of both. But I knew one thing for sure. Jamie's unpredictability had just switched gears from playful nuisance to something a little more tangled. And as I stood there, caught between irritation and curiosity, one question floated up in my mind. Was this harmless eccentricity, or was there something more lurking beneath the surface of my roommate's strange little game? So, there it was. The curtain pulled back on this bizarre little theater production that had been running in my life for weeks. Jamie, the eccentric roommate who might as well have had mischief tattooed on his forehead, was the mastermind behind the notes. And the quiet neighbor? His stoic silence had been the perfect cover for the lookout role. Jamie's grin came back, that half smile that's somewhere between apology and gotcha. He shrugged and said, "Look, I know it wasn't exactly the most conventional way to get your attention, but I figured if you were going to spend every other morning hesitating at the corner, I might as well make it memorable." I tried to imagine the scene, Jamie skulking around the hallway, notebook in hand, jotting down details about a guy's nervous pause before stepping off the curb. It was ridiculous and kind of endearing, if you ignored the creeping freak-out factor. What I wanted, Jamie continued, was not to freak you out but to shake things up a bit. You're stuck in your routines and, well, your dog needed a bit of entertainment on those walks. The neighbor nodded quietly, adding, "Routine makes people predictable. Sometimes unpredictability is the only way to remind you you're alive." I had to laugh. Of all the explanations, this one wasn't what I expected, but it felt oddly fitting. Jamie's prank had escalated from a few notes to this almost covert operation, involving a neighbor who, despite all the silence, wasn't as distant as he seemed. Still, it wasn't exactly a trust exercise. I bristled at how thoroughly they'd invaded my little world. My habits, my moments of hesitation, my space. But also, I couldn't deny it had been strangely fascinating, watching these small windows open into my own daily rituals from an outside perspective. "So," I said, gesturing at the crumpled notes Jamie pulled from his pocket, each one a snapshot of some mundane but somehow intimate detail about my life. "What happens now?" More notes? Secret missions? Should I expect a fan club to start sneaking around the building? Jamie laughed. "No promises. But maybe I'll dial it down before we both end up on some building-wide beware of odd roommates alert." The neighbor gave a rare ghost of a smile. "Just keep balancing those teacups. We'll handle the skateboard." After they left, I sat back, the dog curling up beside me, both of us a little exhausted by the thriller comedy we'd unwittingly starred in. My privacy felt compromised, sure, but in a way that made me appreciate the strange little dance of shared living. The negotiations, the boundary tests, the silent agreements we sometimes forget are there. It also left me wondering how much of our lives we're really sharing, even with the people closest to us. Jamie's antics reminded me that sometimes the lines blur between intrusion and concern, between annoyance and affection. So here I am, still hesitating at that corner every morning, but now with the surreal knowledge that someone's paying more attention to me than a loyal dog and possibly plotting the next note. And honestly, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Guess some friendships are built on secrets, surprises, and a little bit of harmless stalking. Noticing. I'd love to know. Has something like this ever happened to you? That weird mix of creeped out and oddly touched when someone knows your quirks better than you thought they did? Anyway, for now, I'm just trying to figure out where to hide my next secret, or at least how to keep my morning hesitation a mystery again.